In the last video, I talked about the, um, the Declaration of Independence and the ideals that informed its content. And then also I discussed, and we'll continue this discussion, the extent to which at the founding, and then as we'll talk about later on, as the country progresses, the extent to which we fail to live up to those ideals. And then next I talked about the first Constitution of the United States, the Articles of Confederation. And the thrust of that, because I'm not going to test you on the Articles of Confederation, the thrust of my discussion was to give you an idea of what it was, how the government was structured, and the fact that it didn't work. That's the main thing you need to know about the Articles of Confederation. They set up a government designed to be a confederation because they just come out of a unitary system, so they basically did the opposite of what they'd come from, and it didn't work. And so ultimately, there was a convention convened in Philadelphia where the framers had to come back and redo it, taking into account the experiences that they had had over the last 11 years. Now, I want to be clear about something. As I've said, and I'll continue to stress, there were some fundamental problems with the Constitution of the United States, especially as it relates to the enslavement of human beings that began as early as 1619, but was built into and protected by the Constitution. So I don't want to understate the significance of that, and I will be stressing that as we go because I think it's important to understand the development of the United States and the role that the enslavement of human beings played in our economic growth and then our influence in the world. On the other hand, the political scientist in me looks at the Constitution and thinks it's just brilliant, leaving aside that legacy that is so problematic, to say the least. I think one of the reasons that the Constitution still exists and it is still intact today is because of an insight that the framers of the Constitution had. It wasn't because they'd studied the history of the political history of other constitutions, although they did. It wasn't because they were very well read in political philosophy, although most of them were. They understood something really fundamental, and it's something that hasn't changed from the time of the adoption, the writing, and then the ratification of the Constitution to now. I mean, if you think about how many things have changed, transportation has changed, communication has changed, the economy has changed, social relations have changed, just about everything has changed. And yet there's one thing that has been consistent from the time that the Constitution was drafted to now. What do you think that is? What hasn't changed from a time that was, where there were no roads, there were no planes, there were no phones, there were no computers, there were no anything? What hasn't changed from then until now? Well, I would submit to you that the thing that hasn't changed is human nature. And as much as we might not like to talk about it, the fact is that humans are sort of innately selfish. We want to take as much as we can for ourselves. One of the things that I frequently point out to my students is that my granddaughter, Charlotte, she's actually, there's a little picture of her down there, and that's the bear that I used to play with, her lion. I used to talk with her all the time. Charlotte is an amazing kid, just an amazing kid. And I know I'm her grandfather, so I'm biased. Yes, whatever. But nobody had to teach her to be selfish about her toys, right? She had a dear little friend, Kimberly, who came over all the time. And if Kimberly would take a toy, Charlotte would be able to grab it and say, mine. And Kimberly would do the same thing. Nobody had to teach Charlotte to be selfish about her toys. We had to unteach Charlotte. We had to teach her to share, which she does now. She's fabulous. She's amazing. I think human nature is such that we are selfish. Maybe not everybody to the same extent. But that's the thing that the framers understood. And so what they did in creating the Constitution was create a set of institutions that dispersed power, the power to make decisions. They dispersed power to as many groups as possible to make it hard for any one group to gain too much power. And if any one group did gain a lot of power or started to, there were enough groups that also had power that they could sort of like gang up on them and prevent them from taking too much power. The Constitution essentially created a free-for-all. It gave the opportunity for people, not everybody, not slaves, obviously, not women, obviously, less so people who didn't have property, but within their understanding of society at the time, it was designed to make a free-for-all so that nobody could ever win in the struggle over the allocation of benefits and privileges. It was always going to be, to some extent, a stalemate. Now, again, I want to be clear. I'm not going to test you on that. That's just the world according to Phil. But I do think it's true. So in this part of the video, what I'm going to talk about is what happened at the Constitutional Convention, where they met to figure out what they were going to do because the Articles of Confederation weren't working. And the debate was between the Federalists, who wanted to create a more central, powerful national government, and the anti-Federalists, who opposed that. So that's why it says Federalists pro, anti-Federalists con. The Federalists were the ones who favored the Constitution and were pushing for its adoption and ratification. The anti-Federalists were unhappy with it. When the Constitutional Convention was convened, two groups showed up with plans they had already. And I'm going to talk about the plans in a little bit of detail, especially the Virginia plan. But I want to make something clear. I'm not interested in you understanding the Virginia plan. So then why am I talking about it? I'm talking about it because I want to introduce a couple concepts so that when it comes time to talk about the actual Constitution, it'll be easier to explain. So on the study guide, you'll see that there's a question that asks you about the Great Compromise, right? And it says briefly explain the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. And oftentimes, because I talk about the Virginia plan in great detail, students go into great detail talking about the Virginia plan. I'm not interested in your understanding of the Virginia plan. I'm interested in your understanding of the concepts that I'm going to introduce: bicameral, proportional representation, non-proportional representation, those concepts, and also the way that they were structured. Because ultimately what I'm going to be getting around to is that the Constitution was essentially a combination of the Virginia plan, which was the big state plan, the plan supported by the most populous states, and the New Jersey plan, which was the plan supported by the least populous states. And it probably shouldn't surprise you that in the Virginia plan, if it had been adopted, it would have ultimately benefited the larger states. The New Jersey plan, if it had been adopted, it would have ultimately benefited the smaller states and given them more power. It was the combination of the two that's important, and that's what I want to talk about. So I'm going to talk about the Virginia plan, but again, I'm not interested in you understanding the details of the Virginia plan. I'm interested in you understanding the concepts that I'm going to discuss on the Virginia plan so that you can elaborate on and explain the Great Compromise. Okay? So I'll pick up the Virginia plan on the next video.